What kind of civilization chooses to bury its greatest knowledge rather than pass it on? What kind of society encodes its secrets into glass cylinders, seals them in stone vaults beneath volcanic terrain, and then vanishes so thoroughly that even the memory of its name becomes forbidden? And what kind of truth forces an entire culture to flee not upward into history, but downward into secrecy, as if the earth itself were safer than the future waiting above? Cappadocia is introduced to the world as a landscape shaped by gentle geology and soft, volcanic stone, a region of carved dwellings and underground shelters, attributed to practicality and refuge. The textbooks, the travel guides, the institutional narratives speak calmly. Early Christians escaping persecution, Byzantine monks seeking isolation, villagers carving tough to survive the storms of empire. It is a comforting picture. History as necessity, architecture as improvisation, knowledge as a harmless byproduct. But just beneath this accepted version lies a different image, one that historians mention softly, if at all. Beneath the fairy chimneys and the pastoral valleys, colossal subterranean cities descend level after level, connected by hidden passageways that stretch for kilometers. Derinkuyu alone could shelter tens of thousands, complete with ventilation towers, aqueducts, livestock areas, defense mechanisms, and chambers whose purpose modern scholars cannot definitively explain. It is within these depths that anomalies begin to surface. Anomalies that provoke a question, rarely spoken aloud. Were these simply shelters, or were they archives? Much of the stone architecture can be explained through survival, but objects occasionally recovered from collapsed tunnels and sealed pockets complicate the narrative. Thin cylindrical containers, fragile, glass-like, flawless in curvature, yet almost impossibly ancient, have appeared in archaeological logs only briefly before disappearing into private collections or unnamed institutions. Official reports describe them as containers or tubular vessels, but those who have studied them quietly call them something else. Information vaults, a fragmentary inventory from a private excavation record, dated roughly to the 1960s and attributed to a now deceased local historian, describes slender tubes of silicate composition, sealed at one end and capped with a heat-fused bead at the other, containing rolled sheets bearing inscriptions too faint to decode. The document notes that the tubes shattered easily when handled, yet their contents did not decay. This contradiction alone raises a troubling possibility. Who made glass that could survive millennia? And why was its purpose so secret that not a single surviving folktale explains it? The geological layers surrounding the deepest tunnels in Cappadocia complicate the matter further. Sediment analysis conducted by independent researchers has suggested periods of intense habitation long before the eras attributed to Christian or Byzantine inhabitants. A ridge of volcanic ash sealing one of the oldest tunnels has been tentatively dated far earlier than official narratives allow. And within this sealed chamber, fragments of something once deliberately stored, thin slivers of hardened residue along a collapsed shelf, indicate that whatever was hidden there was organized, classified, and meant to endure. The reconstruction of this vanished world begins with evidence scattered across archives, testimonies, and coded documents. A 17th century traveler's chronicle contains a cryptic remark. The people of this land speak of those who lived beneath them, keepers of tubes that held not water nor oil, but memory itself. Seal, 9th century Armenian manuscript, describes the archives of glass used by unnamed ancestors to seal what must not be known until the world is ready. A local Cappadocian folktale collected in the early 20th century speaks of a knowledge that burns the hands of those who open it before its time. Conflicting accounts swirl around these fragments. Some describe a civilization suffocated by invasion, hiding its libraries underground for safety. Others whisper of a priestly order entrusted with forbidden knowledge, astronomical cycles, medicinal formulas, or political secrets capable of shifting empires. A more unsettling theory suggests that the knowledge was not meant to save future generations, but to warn them. One preserved monastic note, written during the Byzantine era, laments in unsettling language, "We pray that the sealed knowledge below never rises again. For what the ancients learned brought them no peace, only silence." Could this be metaphor, religious fear, or an echo of a forgotten catastrophe the subterranean archives were meant to record? The underground cities of Cappadocia extend with a sophistication that defies easy explanation. Ventilation shafts drop hundreds of feet through the earth at perfect angles, engineering that normally demands advanced planning. Large circular stone doors roll into place with precision, locking entire communities from invaders or from something else. Storage chambers arranged in symmetrical patterns suggest classification systems. A room in Derinkuyu with unusual acoustics hints at a place for recitation or transcription. These spaces feel less like shelters and more like repositories. TTCUO, kind of memory machine carved into the earth. In this investigative reconstruction, the past forms through layers of testimony and artifact. One set of accounts proposes that these underground vaults stored texts considered too dangerous for public dissemination, ritual instructions, astronomical knowledge, medicinal breakthroughs, or politically destabilizing ideas. Another suggests that the glass tubes carried genealogies, maps, or scientific records meant not for their own time, but for a distant future. And yet, a more provocative theory emerges from a series of scribal notes found in a remote monastery. The idea that these tubes contained warnings from a civilization that had witnessed a cycle of destruction, whether environmental, astronomical, or societal, and sought to preserve its final message for whoever inherited the earth after them. But were they preserving truth or burying it? A forbidden question emerges. Did this ancient civilization hide its knowledge because it feared external threat, or because the knowledge itself was the threat? Some scholars argue that esoteric societies throughout history often conceal their most powerful teachings. But these glass tubes suggest a level of secrecy beyond religious mystery. Their protective storage in deep earth implies that the knowledge was intended to outlast not just a generation, but an entire species cycle. A coded inscription in a 12th century commentary on Cappadocian symbolism describes the keepers of memory who burned their names but saved their warnings. Another archival record, attributed to an Ottoman surveyor, claims that certain villagers believed those below had seen a darkness or revelation so profound that they descended willingly into the earth to guard it. Were these beliefs distortions of myth or echoes of something once real? The pendulum swings as conflicting interpretations accumulate. One narrative envisions a scientifically advanced prehistoric society whose achievements threatened the authorities above ground, forcing them to hide their discoveries from jealous kings or occupying armies. This version transforms the underground cities into intellectual sanctuaries, libraries, protected from political erasure. Another proposes the opposite, a society terrified of its own knowledge. Perhaps they discovered something. Astronomical cycles predicting devastation, chemical formulas too dangerous, social calculations predicting collapse. In this view, the glass tubes were not treasures to enlighten the future, but barriers to prevent it from repeating the same discovery. A darker variant suggests that the buried knowledge was not about natural threats, but human ones, records of injustices, betrayals, hierarchies, abuses, or rituals that later empires wanted erased. In this interpretation, later powers actively suppressed the memory of the civilization to prevent their truths from resurfacing. Yet archaeological inconsistencies refuse to settle on one explanation. The tunnels show signs of repeated expansion over centuries. Ventilation shafts align with celestial angles. Certain chambers bear etchings that resemble early forms of coding or classification. The stone architecture suggests intentional concealment rather than mere refuge. And then there are the testimonies. Scattered, fragile, easily dismissed, yet strangely persistent. A shepherd's story recorded in 1911 describes glass lights found in a collapsed cavern, objects that glowed until broken. A French explorer in 1890 wrote of transparent rods holding thin ribbons marked with lines no scholar could read. A local elder interviewed in the 1950s claimed that strangers once came searching for the buried words long before archaeologists arrived. These accounts contradict one another, yet they all revolve around the same element: glass tubes that do not belong to any known Cappadocian tradition. If they existed, what did they contain? Some propose astronomical diagrams predicting cycles across millennia. Others imagine medicinal recipes or metallurgical formulas. A more controversial theory suggests that the tubes held personal histories, names, lineages, events, encoded to survive cultural erasure. And one of the most taboo interpretations claims the tubes preserved ritual, knowledge too controversial to survive empire or religion. The emotional atmosphere surrounding these theories sways between awe and dread. Imagine descending through narrow stone corridors lit only by flickering lamps. The air cools, the stone walls close in, every footstep echoes. Then a chamber opens, shelves carved into rock, dust coating their surfaces, fragments of shattered glass scattered like crystalline bones. The silence presses against the ears. What once lay here? Why was it removed? Who decided it must remain hidden? At the furthest depths of this reconstructed past, a civilization takes shape, not named in history, not recorded in empire, but persistent in its architectural fingerprint. A culture meticulous enough to carve entire worlds below ground. A society disciplined enough to classify its knowledge into durable containers. A people aware that the surface world was either too unstable or too dangerous for what they had learned. Were they protecting themselves from the world, or the world from themselves? The narratives clash again. Some depict them as scholars preparing for future enlightenment. Others portray them as guardians suppressing truths to prevent catastrophe. A more extreme proposal envisions them as the final witnesses of a previous cycle of humanity, survivors who encoded their last messages into glass for the next civilization to decipher. Yet no inscription bears their name. No manuscript openly describes their identity. No direct descendant claims their memory. It is as though the civilization erased itself intentionally, removing ego from legacy, leaving only warnings or maps for the distant future. Near the conclusion of this investigation, the pendulum swings into silence. The clues remain scattered, incomplete, contradictory. The glass tubes, if they ever existed in the form described, are either broken, hidden, or locked in private vaults. The underground chambers continue to puzzle archaeologists, and the official narrative of Cappadocia remains unchanged. Caves carved for shelter, cities built for survival, nothing more. But beneath the surface, in the cracks of forgotten testimonies and the dust of sealed chambers, the questions refuse to die. Were these underground cities meant to protect lives or knowledge? Were the glass tubes an archive or a warning? And if a civilization chose to bury its greatest truths beneath the earth, what does that imply about the truths themselves? Whether this subterranean legacy represents scientific foresight, suppressed revelation, or the final whisper of a forgotten society is a question that remains open, quiet, unresolved, waiting beneath centuries of stone. What these fragments truly mean, whether they reflect a hidden chapter of human history or simply the imagination of those seeking patterns in silence, is yours to decide. If these mysteries call to you, if forbidden histories and buried truths compel you to look deeper, subscribe to NoetEra, Worlds Within, where the past is never as silent as it seems.